All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural episode of Watchpoint. What is Watchpoint, you ask? A show focused on the Overwatch competitive scene, teams, players, events, and more. I'm joined by my co-hosts here, oPlaiD and Slasher. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
That's great. Great. You know what? I was actually so surprised. I thought Sam was going to be doing the intro, and then ZP just started talking. And I was like, oh, okay.
Threw you off your game.
Setting the tone early on.
I thought the same going in. It's like, no, you go ahead and do the host stuff. I'm like, all right, I will do it. I will do the hosting thing.
You're the broadcaster, man, okay? You know, I'm just a journalist. I write things. I don't talk, you know?
This is your home, Sam.
It is my home at the Daily Dots. So...
Alrighty, guys. So we have a lot of topics on our plate here today. As mentioned, Watchpoint is focused on the competitive scene, and we're just going to dive right into it. We want to be focused. We want to be efficient. So going right into it, of course, this week was very big in Overwatch. Lots of events, starting out with ESL France, Creation versus Rogue, and into the ESL qualifiers, EU versus NA. So let's just start with ESL France, Creation versus Rogue. Creation able to go in there and take out Rogue pretty decisively. What do you guys think?
I think it was behind a paywall, so the VODs are not really watchable right now.
Oh, basically.
Hey, this is what we're doing now, right? This isn't a broadcast. This is what we're going to be doing. But I think it was very good for Creation. I think it makes need to get over some LAN jitters and win a tournament, especially compared to how they lost against Rogue in the finals of Take TV. So I think that was big for him and big for that team, and also showed some questions for Rogue. Going forward.
I feel like Rogue's slumping a little bit recently.
Well, you know, they're doing their little own changes themselves. They have now Nox over there, but then I don't know what the current contract situation is with Creation, and if it is for sure now he on Rogue. I am assuming that is now a lock, and I think it's going to take some time for them to work it out.
Yeah, I mean, there were roster moves for those who know, of course. Nox used to be with Creation, now is with Rogue. There was a little bit of drama in regards to, was there a buyout? Was there not a buyout? What's going on? Creation at one point even said they're pursuing legal action, or they're looking into their options for legal action. The weird thing with esports is that even though esports players sign contracts, until you get to a truly higher level, oftentimes the cost of actually pursuing legal action outweighs just letting the thing go. So it's a little bit weird when you get into that.
By the time you get someone in court, there's already been like 10 months of tournaments that have already passed with the player doing whatever they wanted. So it takes someone like Blizzard to kind of enforce that on the scene, or you know, Valve was involved in the SK Luminosity deal. So you'll have to wait and see how those kind of things evolve in the scene. But I think the amount of money and investment is getting so big so fast that we're going to see a little bit more of this kind of thing happening soon, I think.
I mean, Rogue did just play there's an Acer Pro Challenge going on right now on the Ghost of Gamer stream with Reunited and Creation playing. And Rogue pretty well against Misfits. I mean, it is online, and like the majority of the tournaments we've had so far in Overwatch have been on the internet, and the game it's only a month old, right, everyone? So the game's a little young, and for anyone from any of the more traditional esports scenes that have been around for much longer, online doesn't mean anything. I mean, yeah, majority of the seasons are played online in terms of the the regular season games, but the playoffs and the big events, just like the major we have going on right now in Cologne, are offline events, LAN events. Those are the ones that really mean something. So we've had so many online weeklies and tournaments and like 2-day weekend tournaments, and those are all fine and dandy, and they are good, but they really are not indicative of anything, to be completely honest. And the LAN events are really what's going to set apart these teams.
So speaking of LAN events, that's a beautiful lead-in, Rod, to our next topic, which is, of course, the ESL qualifiers. Lots to talk about here, both teams that have gone through and, of course, the rule set, which we've dedicated a lot of time to here today. But let's talk about the teams that got through. First on the U side, Misfits, SG1, Anox, Reunited, all getting through. And we're talking a little bit before the show started, and with 16 slots to the final tournament, I feel like every major team we know in the Overwatch scene that's been around should be able to qualify by the time it's all said and done. The hardest month was actually the hardest week was actually our last week, where no one had qualified, everyone was in. Because you look at it going forward, Misfits, SG1, Anox Reunited, they're not in on the U, or they're not going to be in any future qualifiers for the U side. On the NA side, Envious, NG Red, LG, C9, they're all gone. So I feel like by the time we get the qualifier week 3 or 4, most of the teams we know will have already qualified.
For sure. I mean, it's top 16 go to the NA qualifier and EU qualifier, and the top 4 from each region there go to the $100,000 LAN event. So this is kind of just the beginning. You know, obviously we're going to see a lot of teams that we probably haven't even heard of who are at the 16-team qualifier, don't have established teams in the scene. So it'll be interesting if there's more teams that come out of the woodwork somehow. Like we've started to see some players who didn't play in the beta who are kind of making a name for themselves. Maybe there's some teams there that, in a couple of weeks, maybe they'll be decent, but we'll have to wait and see. I think that, at least for this week, the results were fairly expected. I mean, there were a couple of really nice matches, really close matches, but there's also a lot of chaos, too. But we can talk about that later.
It's one of those things where the results, if you tell people from before the event, hey, Envious, Northern Gaming Red, LG, and C9 will get through in the NA side, people would just go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But then you explain the circumstances in which it happened, the rule set. We had some chaos this week.
Before we do rules, which will be like a half an hour long, wonderful discussion, cannot wait. The two things that I'm looking for in these qualifiers, as someone who actually I played in the European qualifiers with Fortress, including Shadowburn, Forsaken, and Aveka last weekend. We actually almost got to the final day. We lost against Press. It was pretty close. So I did as well as FaZe, guys. Take that with what you wish. The two things that I'm looking for in these qualifiers are because if every top team is getting in, every team that we talk about and that we've seen throughout most of the top end of competitive Overwatch is going to get in to the final 16. That's not a problem. But it really is, which of them are not going to get in top 8? And really, if you don't get in top 8, that I think is going to be a worrisome problem. Yeah, the first qualifier is going to be very hard on NA. EU was actually a little bit of an opportunity, considering that Creation and Rogue were at the ESL LAN and that they didn't get to play in the qualifier. That gave a team like Anox the opportunity to already qualify themselves into the next round, which I think is very big for Cypher and crew. And then two, as Sam says, it's really going to be what teams on the cusp are now up and coming that are going to probably get those 12 to 16 spots. That would include new mixed teams from players that have either kicked off their teams or who left their teams most recently, which there are several of now. And then also players that are now have just been playing since the release of the game officially, along with some other players that are switching over from other games still. Like Rob Wiz coming over to Overwatch, which was only maybe 3.5 weeks ago. Did he really stop playing Counter-Strike now? Huh?
He played in the beta a little bit.
Little bit. But he was
also playing Mercy for Selfless. Like he's like one of this legendary sniper in multiple games. He's just playing Mercy. It's just like.
Well, Dahang is on Mercy for Liquid, so you have that entire aspect going on too. And actually, one thing that this brings up to me, just as we talk about it, is that we've talked a lot about new sponsors getting into the Overwatch scene. I don't think necessarily a TSM or something is going to hop on one of the teams that barely gets in top 16 per se. I think they're probably going to be waiting to build more of a super team or something down the line. But I do think that of the teams that get in, they will be new unsponsored teams that get in a lot of those spots. I think we'll see a lot of your second tier sponsors, people that not your uber elite sponsors, but sponsors that have been in esports for a while will probably pick up some of the teams that are qualifying. So it's a huge opportunity for new teams in the scene right now.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, like some of these teams could stand to make, get a decent salary, I think, from just performing well in an event like this, even making it into the qualifying rounds.
So, Nubrus is by far the best team right now to pick up. That is the team that all of those orgs, which I believe they already are interested and are discussing with them and a few others, Nubrus is the one that everyone to get. Other than them, it is kind of slim pickings right now, I think.
I think the second best team outside the second best team outside Nubris, which isn't necessarily on the same level in the sense that I don't think they're going to be beating the very top teams anytime soon. But they have been improving. They have been having better showing against teams like, say, Galeforce or Liquid or all the rest would be One Shot. And One Shot, I don't see a TSM type team picking up, but I do think they could get picked up by someone decent sooner rather than later. They're in a weird spot right now where do they sell out effectively early and hope that they get a better deal later on, or do they hold out hoping that they do start being the top teams and then can get the bigger deal? But One Shot, I think, probably the most notable unsigned NA team outside of Nubris.
If you're going to give One Shot a deal, then Overwatch Esports has problems on the highest level of competitive play.
Really?
Yeah, man. I mean, look, already I think that sponsors now are trying to get in that Overwatch big hype, the big craziness. It's already doing very well on stream. You know, it does very well on social media, and there's memes, and that all has made Overwatch Esports really big and want the owners to pick up teams. And now we already see kind of mediocre performances coming out on these big sponsored teams already. And there's even more, and we have a bunch of other teams, everyone that we've just mentioned, plus several others that are in LCS and the other game that haven't picked up teams that are all probably going to. That's an extra 8 to 10 teams. It doesn't feel like there's enough top talent right now in Overwatch.
Well, the one thing I'd say, though, is that if people think that something is growing, they will invest just as a starting point. And look, I mean, we want to talk about crappy teams being owned. I mean, there's still a billionaire owns the New York Jets, and they still play every season. So I'm just saying, like, even if a team isn't doing the greatest, if they are still in the scene and sort of notable, I could still see a team picking it up. Sorry, Jets fans. I make the Jets a whipping boy way too often.
I actually think much more to Europe when I think of teams that would be next. I guess G1, I think, is probably very deserving of a sponsorship by now. They've done very well for themselves. And only Graviton Surge recently joined Misfits, and they were rated or ranked #1 on the very trusting Gosu Gamers ranking website just a little while ago. That is probably no longer the case now that they lost to Rogue today. But that was only recent that they got picked up. So I think there's probably a lot more talent in Europe, and of course we haven't mentioned Korea or China, which I thought it was going to take a year for them to beat all the white people.
I'm not. Gaming's holding tryouts. It's happening, you know.
It's might be sooner.
There's more team houses in Asia than there are in NA and EU right now.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that as far as Asian teams go, because OneSun actually, it was not the last weekly, but the weekly before that, they actually had a really good showing in the NA weekly. I think they got to top 4. Believe it or not, and they were doing surprisingly well, especially given the ping involved. So, Asian scene definitely something to keep an eye on. I mean, you do wonder when the first time we do have a world championship where you see that, how will they do? Will you have huge shockwaves if you do have a team coming in from China or Korea that beats one of the established NA or EU teams? I feel like if that happens, the reaction would just be huge.
I mean, it wouldn't be that surprising to see one come in at BlizzCon and win it or something like that. Like, that's definitely a possibility. I mean, I think that would be an upset from our perspective, but, you know, who knows at this point, right?
Yeah, but, like, okay, everyone out there, all the few people who are watching so far, it is very different in this game than it is in any other game, because the Asian community not only doesn't have a lot of experience in FPS, Western FPS games, because they've been playing Crossfire and Sudden Attack for so long, they even have less in playing deathmatch FPS games. So there's been like a few TF2 teams and/or Quake players and/or Wolfenstein, etc. players throughout the years, but that's always been the smallest of the community. So if there's any game in esports that the Western esports players should be winning, it is Overwatch. So that even with that, it is very scary to see the Chinese and Korean players already be really good and screaming more hours and practicing more, even though I think they're the furthest behind. And it would actually surprise me quite a lot if they won BlizzCon. There's there's tiny slimmer of hope, I think, in my head, a little bit more than there was maybe a month ago.
I mean, it is like, you know, they don't have that experience with the deathmatch type games, but it's also like in Overwatch, you know, maybe 3 of the roles don't need that kind of skill, and they have players who have this, you know, some of the skill that is required to play, like the supports and tanks. Plus, they do have some highly skilled players. Like even in Counter-Strike, they had teams that were capable of winning matches on the world stage because they had ridiculous aimers and stuff like that. So there's probably people out there who have that talent that, you know, if you combine them with some of the other guys who take a more cerebral approach to gaming, you could make pretty good Overwatch lineups, right? Especially if you're playing 14 hours a day, 10 hours of scrims or whatever, they claim to. So I don't know.
Well,
it'll be interesting.
I'll make one point here before we move on to the ESL rules and qualifiers, is that you talk about the scrim times and all the rest. You look at the NA and EU teams right now, there's plenty of teams where their scrim time is only in the realm of 4 to 5 hours a day, if that at points. Actually, look at Rogue, for example, where Tavik is streaming something like 8-9 hours a day on top of whatever he's scrimming. But the reality is, if he's doing all that much on the personal stream, it makes you wonder how much, say, a team like Rogue is actually screwing things out. Or you look at LG, where Seagull's streaming a whole lot. How much time do they have to scrim relative to perhaps these teams that are in a team house and scrimming 12 hours a day? That's what those regions do. They are incredibly crazy on their practice schedules. So you do wonder if the difference between NA and EU on how much you scrim together as a team will actually hurt the NA and EU seed over time.
MV has definitely shown they've done the best job of scrimming. That has helped immensely by them all coming over to the gaming house, the MV gaming house in North Carolina. So I think it really shows in their results that how much the one all living together, even though that's debatable how good that is right now in esports, these gaming houses. But all at least living together and they're practicing quite a lot has shown that it really does work. So with Woon from MIG telling me that their sister teams are playing 13, 14 hours a day of scrims and analyzation and everything. I think that all of the Western players should take a look at all the other esports games and what has happened to them at the championships and take note to got to put in some more hours.
Ooh. So we have an update here, and we're going to talk about this for a few minutes and then get into the ESL rules and all the rest. But Sam has just bring us the breaking news saying, quote, Galeforce has released their team.
It's the organization team have mutually agreed upon the decision after coming to the realization that the two have differing perspectives. So that kind of sounds like PR talk, like maybe the players think they can get a better deal somewhere else or something like that.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah. Like that Galeforce, they would not release their team because they have to be happy with the results. It's been a top 4 NA team. They've been doing really well. Top 4, at least top 6. They're like in and out of the top 4. But yeah, that's not a case where they willing release. It's sort of one of those things where we're not happy with this contract. Galeforce is potentially not able to fulfill what they want, and they're going elsewhere. But they probably wouldn't be doing that unless they thought that they had a chance with another bigger org somewhere else. So who knows where that's going to go.
I mean, that's the thing. I think a lot of the teams that have already signed are kind of unhappy with the situation because things have exploded so hugely. A lot of teams signed in the beta before the game was released, and it's got 10 million plus players, right? I mean, that's like some teams expected that, but that's also like so bigger than a lot of the players expected, and also a lot of the organizations expected. So there's so much more money available now. So I think this will become more and more common, this kind of thing.
Well, Galeforce
all right, so we're going to move on to the meat of the day. This is something that we've wanted to talk for a long time. ESL rules. We went into the qualifiers. The rule set, of course, was no hero limit, no stopwatch on completions for payload maps, and we had some interesting results, to say the least. And now it's coming. Yeah, and 2 CP maps.
Yeah, don't forget that.
Yeah, can't forget that.
You had the full mix of them all. And we had some interesting results, to say the least. So interesting that the rules are going to be changing.
I'm actually amazed that they had such a quick turnaround on that. I mean, but obviously watching any stream of all these matches, there's 37,000 people watching a game, and everyone's complaining that there's 4 to 6 tracers and just craziness going on. I think we actually have a couple clips from some of the matches. Any stream of all these matches, there's the past 37,000 people watching a game, and everyone's the action.
All right, so I'm looking at the list of clips here. Let's roll up the Galeforce versus C9 clip, because that was something else.
Just fantastic.
Oh, we got the Cloud9 Nubers one right here. Volskaya. That was another ridiculous match.
All right, so this is where I hope the clips are. Okay, it's getting set up right now. Okay. But yeah, I mean, so basically, to give a summary of the issue for people wondering, well, gee, what's the issue? Hero stacking leads to some really weird comps that are both hard to observe and sort of kind of a cluster, to say the least. And what happens in, say, King of the Hill, you'll end up in situations where you get 2 Tracers, 2 Winstons, 2 Lucios. And then if a team is losing, they'll go to more Tracers. And why? Because it's very hard to deal with that. It's not that Tracer itself is inherently overpowered, that Winston is inherently overpowered. It's that these heroes, when stacked, create balance issues. And it came out probably the most strongly in King of the Hill compared to any other map type.
There's a couple other issues too, like the issue with overtime. With these heroes, you can really stay alive a long time and delay a long time. And if you control the control point, it ticks up all the way to 99% if you keep contesting it, even if the enemy team is contesting it. So you can kind of just delay it till it maxes out 99%, like we basically see in the clip that we just showed with the fabled 2-2-2 composition. So there's like a whole conflation of a lot of issues that have created the situation where, especially on Control and also on Assault, the 2CP maps, there's tons of hero stacking. There's not that much creativity. And the other issue with that composition is it's just not that great to watch. It's just hectic battles everywhere. You can't really, there's no team coordination that's visible to a spectator, basically. Even if, the players are executing in certain ways that do take teamwork. Because as we've learned, teamwork is key.
Alrighty, and yeah, I mean, so just to pile on from that from the broadcaster point of view, is that when casting, I go on my way to be professional at all times. I'm not going to, get super sarcastic about what I'm seeing. I'm going to get cast it with the most intensity I can and make it sound as exciting as I can going into it and really trying to bring up the high points. But even from a caster point of view is that I felt like I wasn't able to really get on the high points like I could in One Hero Limit. One Hero Limit, there's much more stories to follow. There's sort of, okay, this person is on Hero X, he's going to do Y, and here's what you have to look for, and you get mini storylines throughout the course of a match. When you devolve into 2-2-2 versus 2-2-2, or even bigger stacks, it's just sort of like, all right, both teams are fighting each other. You lose the impact of the individual and just sort of turns one wave rushing into another. And from a caster point of view, you can sort of pick out things to look at, but I felt like it didn't make quite as compelling of a production as, say, the One Hero Limit tournaments I've been doing for the last month and a half.
Yeah, I mean, I think Pure from Splice had a comment I thought was interesting where he said basically he could tell when it was like 2-2-2 versus 2-2-2 just from hearing like the tone and the coherency of the broadcast. He didn't actually have to even see the video of the match.
Yeah, because boring as hell.
Yeah.
It's boring. It's lame. It's lame to play. It's lame to watch. ZP, you're making it sound, well, I just didn't have as much excitement doing the broadcast. You hated it. You're on the talk show now, right? This isn't the professional setting that you want where you got to be all PC and cool on the broadcast for all the fans out there, correct? It was not at all a good experience to be as someone who also has casted the 2-2-2, because I had played in the 2-2-2, and the majority of players can agree it's not fun to play in. So then when you're trying to broadcast something the players don't even truly believe most of them is like a super fun thing to do, it gets very tiresome to even broadcast that type of thing. Just because there's so many of the same character, it is very hectic, and that's just how really that game mode works. Specifically, is King of the Hill. We won't really see that 2-2-2 same thing on Payload maps just because
you see it on 2CP sometimes. Just because it is similar in a control point.
Well, that's like a whole other also additional bad thing, Sam. Yeah, you have another game mode that is worse than King of the Hill. So you have this 2CP game mode, which is all types of messed up, and then you have on No Hero Limit, so you get several monkey diva attacks and then stall outs at the very end, which really worked so well on Hanamura, but it could probably work pretty well on Volskaya and or Anubis too. And this is what happens. There's conflated issues between no hero limits and the inclusion and the forced use of the 2CP maps, which are not good for high-end competitive Overwatch play. And
plus overtime rules.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things that are contributing to this crazy week of action, or of non-action in some ways. I don't know. I mean, the stacking thing is like, in some ways we did see like with the 2CP maps and the stacking, like in the Cloud9 Nubers match, some of the games yesterday, Nubers and Luminosity, we saw a lot of like creativity and different team compositions that can come out of it. It's just that in certain other situations, it's definitely detrimental to the game, right? I mean, do you think there's any advantage to having the class stacking like as a mechanic, or like, you know, I guess there could be an alternative where you can stack 1 duplicate, so you could have, you know, 4 singles and 2 of the same hero or something like that.
So
you could get
the interesting. That's been brought up. I have mixed feelings in that. On one hand, I think it would not be as bad and might open up a few things strategy-wise. I do think from the casting end, it still gets a little bit awkward when you have 2 of the same hero. More than anything else, I think for it to be tested, and I'm totally open to testing, say a 2-1-1-1-1, that type of format. I think you would have to have the in-game support, though. You would need to have the ability to set 2 of 1 hero anyways, or another way of looking at it, must have 5 unique heroes at all times, would be a more elegant way of phrasing it, perhaps. And something like that, I think that would be pretty cool to try out. But it's going to be difficult without in-game support, just because it's on the honor system, and if someone screws up, then it gets weird, and then admins get involved and all the rest. But I do think there's some merit to trying that out at some point.
In-game support, or lack thereof, is the theme throughout the entirety of the rules and rule changes, and why everyone is confused about watching Overwatch esports tournaments.
We haven't even mentioned stopwatch, and that was another thing that changed the rules
Yes.
after this week of play, where like I would tune in on Wednesday to watch the ESL qualifiers, and I'd be like, oh, this is kind of a close match. Like this Pretz team, I haven't really seen them play. They're doing pretty well against, I think it was Misfits maybe. And then it's like, wait, like we're playing Kings Row. It doesn't even matter. There's no point in watching it. It's going to be a tie. I knew it was going to, it's going to be a tie. It's like, it was stupid without stopwatch. Just basically ruined, the entirety of watching most Payload maps. I think we saw on NA yesterday, like the first match had like 3 or 4 ties or something like that. It was just insane. And it's like, Blizzard spent the effort to add that distance check into the game, and they didn't do it for stopwatch, even though the distance check didn't solve any of the problems for the pro scene. It was just so frustrating, because no one would have complained about stopwatch if they had just implemented it, spent that effort implementing it in the game there. So we know they're going to implement Timebank in the future, so it'll be okay, but it's just really frustrating. Like, as someone, who's been playing in these matches for like 8 months now,
The interesting thing about the payload stuff is they got it half right. The distancing is actually really, really good for partial completions. It makes partial completions way better than the old stopwatch to point in between. And it actually makes the perfect system right now, where you compare the times at the very end, where neither team is able to complete, you judge distance. Great. Both teams are able to complete, you judge time. And on the off chance that both teams get the exact same time, which to my knowledge I don't think has ever happened in Overwatch history, so it would be incredibly rare, then you just have a draw. And that's perfectly okay. So ESL, they are going to stopwatch going forward, and I think that's a really good solution. It's a little bit weird, though, that you had this sort of resistance to stopwatch for this entire time. I know there are arguments saying, well, gee, it doesn't allow for X amount of strategy. And in fact, Payload will be going to a Timebank system, which is sort of stopwatch with a little bit stuff. But
like, it doesn't allow slow strats. Like, what is that? What is a slow strat? Like, no one who makes that argument has a concrete example of what that actually means.
I agree.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, you have the argument of a slow strategy, but just sort of like, if teams had a guaranteed way of cracking a defense, like if you could go up against a Envy and know that if I run this offense, I am guaranteed the cap, we would have seen it. Teams would have run that already, instead of just throwing whatever they could at the wall. Like, we would see the slow strategies already coming out and then be like, well, I could run this and have it guaranteed, but people are running the fast strategy instead. But overall, that's not really a thing. If it was a thing, I think we would have seen it.
The fast strategy has more chances to fail. I mean, we kind of did see some slow strats this week, because there was time as a factor. You could say that, like, the double dragon Hanzo bullshit that Luminosity ran with the 2 Zaryas was one of those strats, and that was kind of an interesting stacking strat, because with the 2 Hanzos, you basically have like 100% wall hack uptime. So basically just see where they all are. You can look through the wall, see where their Mercy's hiding, and then kill her around the wall with 2 scatter arrows, and then you just combo, Zarya and Hanzo. But that was actually still effective, like in a stopwatch way. Like, they just rolled through most of Watchpoint Gibraltar till the final point, like using that composition. And maybe that's the example of a slow strat, because Zarya charges slowly, right? So you just wait for that right moment. But that'd be like the only example, and it's like that strat's not necessarily more stable than any other faster strat. And I don't think that having stopwatch would stop them from running it. Now, having the hero limit will, obviously, because you can't have 2 Hanzos, but I mean, you have to have a time-based component. It's basically all there is to it. Otherwise, you can't get a fair result with the game mode.
they made the main game mode of Overwatch, like the thing that the entire game revolves around, is a payload. And the payload for the game is stopwatch. It is defined by time. That is how the entire game mode works. If they wanted to create another default game mode for the entire game to be revolved around, they could have did it with a thing that wasn't revolved around time. So because it is a payload, and the only way to win the game is to push it in a time manner, then that is by default how it has to be ruled. And so then because of that, they've had to create this thing called the Timebank, which I actually think is a pretty good idea. And I wouldn't surprise me.
I think it's better than stopwatch, honestly. I like it better than stopwatch. I think if they do it right for payload, it will be better because it'll give you more opportunity to actually have like shifting strategy throughout a game, because once you finish once fast, then the other team will be able to adjust to your attack, and it'll be more interesting, I think. Slightly more confusing than stopwatch, though, which was an issue with stopwatch. But
like, I'm pretty sure they will implement Timebank into the rule set once it is launched for Payload. Like, I am pretty sure once that comes out, it will be automatically.
So the dream, right, is this season's supposed to last midway through August, right? About theirs, and the fall season starts after that. So in theory, that Timebank could be ready for the 100K Gamescom tournament. That's
it has
the
to
dream.
be exactly on there.
I wonder if that's like is that a priority for them? Are they like making sure that they hit that date? Especially now that they're.
My guess is that internally it would probably be a priority. And in worst case scenario, they also have the ability of pushing out builds or options a little bit earlier. I'm not sure they would want to do that, but in an emergency, they do have the ability to do that. They're not necessarily tied 1-to-1 to the live build, because you stop to think about how Gamescom is going to go. Remember that Overwatch has no inherent LAN support. For Blizzard to set up a LAN server, they actually have to set up their own proprietary software and special setup anyways to get LAN pings. And they will do that for Gamescom. There's no way that they won't do that. So yeah, I mean, I think one way or the other, I think it's probably more likely not that Timebank is in for Gamescom, but for Payload, but we'll just have to see.
I mean, that is going to, because right now, once they go back to stopwatch, there's no chance of them implementing in the in-game stopwatch UI, which they said that they've had, and they just didn't want to put it in there for this whole time. So it's not like it's just going to be just as hard for all the viewers to get, like, one of the problems for stopwatch this whole time is that because there's no in-game UI support, the viewers out there are always like, well, what time it is, and they got to look at the production, and they got to rely on production, and it's okay, but it's nothing compared to the in-game. So now we go back to like production stuff.
If you rely on production, the match itself doesn't end. It usually ends with someone saying GG, and then like a team pushes the cart so you can see the play of the game, and it's just like,
I think we're just going to have to deal with that until the Timebank. Making players play a different game mode, it's so close enough to stopwatch now, and the players are going to be competing in 2CP Timebank stuff, so I don't think it's unfair for them if they just switch it. Like, everyone's going to be practicing stopwatch, and then it's Timebank. It's so close that I think that's okay for Blizzard to do. Like, I wouldn't be mad at them for changing it up on the players right before the tournament. I think it'd be kind of necessary. The only worry I have is with Timebank that we've seen so far, you can now, maps can go now like an hour
yes.
or so, because each team could win like really quickly, and then each team plays offense like 3 times, and then you have to like wait at the switching points, the switching the heroes, and the time layover and all that other stuff in between the game. Or games could go really long, and then they each complete at the very end, and then each team has a chance to then redo it one time themselves, and then they each can tie of capturing A, and then after that you have the tiebreaker from it. So even though Timebank has created, I think, a cool rule set, and actually might be a little bit better on the players, considering this whole game is offensively favored and defenses get screwed all the time, so you have another chance of a Timebank mode to do that. They've made maps actually much longer now. Like, stopwatch can be the map in 10 minutes.
I think that's good, though. I mean, we've seen tons of King's Row matches where it's like 4-minute time and like 6-minute time, and it's just like, is that even like a map? Like, that's like, like 4 rounds of Counter-Strike or something. It's like, it's nothing. You want to have a longer match, because then there's more chances for teams to show their skill and their tactical ability, their strategy ability. I think Timebank also allows, with those multiple rounds, there's more options to actually switch your team comp wholesale, and you don't have to worry about things like, oh, I'm going to miss this ultimate or something like that. So I think that adds more possibility to the game. I mean, I think that some of those some of those games were ridiculous, like when the Nubris Cloud9 Volskaya game was just insane with like what they were pulling out. And part of that's obviously because of the hero stacking, but that was also interesting and fun to watch because there was so much back and forth between the teams, utilizing different heroes and trying to figure out how to stop certain things like on the fly. So I think that would be it'd be interesting to see that more often. I think so. I like Timebank for that reason. And I don't mind the length of the matches, but maybe that's just me.
Also, I think there's a really easy solution to the matches going way too long on 2CP. And the way you deal with that really is that you just set it up so that on 2CP, you either put teams further up on the defense. So their setup, instead of being a minute, is something like 20 to 30 seconds. Like, you can definitely cut down and a lot of easier ways. So have we hit everything we want to hit here for the rules discussion and everything else? So the fact that we are switching...
I have a better solution. It might be that you don't play the 2CP maps because they're not good enough to be played at a high level competitively as EP, and there's no reason they should be played just because Blizzard created them and they want them to be played, and they put a lot of hard work into it, and they want all the scenery to be showed, and none of that really truly matters.
So you think the game type itself was just flawed and there's no way to like improve things? Like maybe you could make the you spawn faster on defense, but the spawn's further away, so you can't just come out as D.Va and contest the point instantly. That would improve things, right? But is it just flawed in general?
I feel like maps would need an entire redesign. Also, 2CP as a game mode, I don't truly think was successful. Team Fortress 2 successfully did 5CP, and I don't think this is even remotely close.
Different. Yeah, it's a lot different.
Yes, it is a lot different, but it was something that they created and thought of. That was a new game mode to TF2, right? Was there 5CP before TF2? Was that
some games had similar things like DoD and whatever, but it wasn't exactly the same.
And I think this experiment of these kind of shortish maps with only 2 capture points and you can only go one direction was an experiment, and I think it has shown to be a failure. I
thought it was interesting because they talked about, they want attack and defense heroes to be viable on their maps, right? That's one of the reasons why they said they've kind of tried the 5CP type TF2 thing where it's symmetrical and it's a back and forth tug of war, but that basically limits the option of defense heroes. But then they added control, which does the exact same thing and limits tons of heroes because they're just not viable when you're just fighting on a single point the entire time. So it was
2 things. Not only does control limit more heroes by comparison, but also I don't like the entire designation of attack and defense heroes to begin with. This is sort of a segue into something completely random, but I'll just notice I've been doing a lot of solo queue recently, trying to just solo queue up to 70-ish and go from there on my day off the other day. And something that came up in more matches than not, just randomly from people in their low 60s, were things like, why do we have 3 offensive heroes on defense? And the heroes on defense are Farah, 76, and McCree. These are all very good defensive heroes, but they're labeled offense. It wasn't even McCree, it was Reaper. It was even better as far as the meta goes. So it was very meta heroes, and the guy says, why do we have all these offensive heroes on defense? It's okay, at some point, I'm not sure the offensive-defensive hero labeling is actually helping anything in the game right now, because people take it way too literally.
They'll learn. I thought that was another interesting thing about this past week is that people, I think there's more discussion about how the pro scene might actually affect the competitive play ladder now that competitive play is a thing, and how the metagame is actually going to shift towards the pro scene like it does in other games. So, I don't know, that's another aside.
So we've hit most thing on the rules discussion. I probably would have liked to talk a little bit more about why I think no hero limit cap. What?
You have to give, I think, a lot of praise to Blizzard for listening to the pro players and the community members after they announced this rule set with ESL, which was influenced by Blizzard, and ESL had to agree to it, which was a huge deviation from what the community had been trying out the previous month and a half, with all the Ghost of Gamers weeklies being 1 hero limit and then removal of 2CP maps, which I think that we had 6 D.Va spam on Hanamura, we had 6 Tracer spam also on Hanamura and on Dorado, which made the viewership lose its mind and how terrible this was. I definitely think all that stuff really did help, and the matches being an hour and a half long and the players complaining. But Blizzard did listen, and they
Nice.
aligned with what the players wanted.
Yeah.
And I think it's very good of them to show how fast they can actually make that change. And I think kudos to Blizzard for doing it that quickly.
Blizzard's speed at adapting is extremely commendable, just because it would be very easy for them to just sort of stick their head in the sand and be like, well, we already did it for here. We're going to do it for the rest of the qualifier. We'll change later. They actually moved very swiftly on it, both because of the players and the viewership. So, yeah, I mean, as I said, incredibly commendable.
I mean, I think that, obviously you have to give them praise for doing that, but it also makes me worried and annoyed a little bit because it's like a lot of these issues were very predictable. Like stopwatches, like it's obvious that you need that to actually have like real competitive matches. And it's like there's, we've had 8 months where we've tried different alternatives to it and things like that, and it just hasn't worked. Yet they just ignore that, and then after 1 week they switch it back because, oh, the things that we've already learned over this long period that we've already been complaining about are still a problem. And now that maybe more players than just, the people who have been more involved with the competitive scene are complaining about it, but it just, feels like they need to take that more to heart to begin with, because some of these things could easily be avoided.
I mean, I give them kudos, but yes, it is kind of baffling they had to do this in the first place to make sure that all the players emailed, and then we had to then go through these changes.
I mean, the coin
Like,
flip sudden death thing, like, what is that? That was just insane. Like, no one is going to like that. It's obvious, yet they put it in the game, and it's like, it's a competitive play mode, yet they're putting something that is, Kaplan said it's not as imbalanced as you think. Well, that means it's still imbalanced. Like, you actually want to allow that, in your game?
I need to hit on one thing, and this is something game devs do a lot. In particular, and we do need to move on after this, but here's one thing that happens a lot, which is kind of unfortunate, is that there's a lot of things where it's very tempting as a developer to look at the overall aggregate stats and be like, well, for everyone, if you look at the entire stats totality, it's actually very even. The problem is that a lot of things, especially sudden death, because we're coming at this from the higher end perspective, right? Sudden death is probably very fair and probably are fine with the system as it was. The problem was, and similar to some of the issues that people have with matchmaking, all this stuff breaks down when you get to the top 0.1%. It's not really acceptable to go, well, it's fine for everything else, they can just deal with it, because you do need to make that segment of your player base happy, because those are people that are streaming. If your matchmaking is broken on the high end and Tavik is streaming to the top Twitch viewership and he's hating his life because it's putting him with a bunch of 60s, him with a bunch of 50s versus a team of 70s, that's a problem. And similarly to sudden death here is that it doesn't matter if on most matches it's not an issue and it's 50-50 if on the top end one side is winning way over another, just because of how consistent people are at that level. So
I mean, it was an issue at the bottom end because people would defend and then they'd tie and they'd go to sudden death.
Yeah.
But I mean, the coin flip thing is just insane because no one likes that. It's just something that like is obviously unfair and it ruins your game experience, like no matter what kind of level of player you are.
Well, then this is something to be concerned about, I guess, about Timebank, is that we could end in a tie in Timebank still. All games could still be tied because
with 2CP. I mean, with the
Payload Timebank can still be a tie.
Payload is a lot rarer. Payload would be more susceptible on the hybrid Payload map, so your King's Row of the world. I think it would almost be impossible to get a tie on Dorado.
I mean, the other thing.
How would you get a tie on Dorado? No, sorry, not Dorado, but yeah, Dorado, because you're still pushing the payload up there. How would you ever get a tie on Dorado to get an exactly even
if
payload?
If both teams
push
cap
there?
the map, then the next attack, neither of them touch the card at all. It would be a tie.
Because it would judge on distance with Timebank on payload. It'd be this amount of points plus X distance. I'm not saying it won't happen. I just think it would be incredibly unlikely to ever get that on payload.
It is incredibly unlikely, but it's possible.
Alrighty, so we've talked mostly about the rules and stuff. Quickly here, before we wrap up, let's talk about some of the stuff that we have coming down the pipe here today and over the course of the week. I know upcoming, of course, we already had the Acer Pro stuff go on earlier today. And later tonight, we have beat quarterfinals and losers round 1 going on. That's going to be 5 different sets going on, and it's starting out with Envious versus Rogue, and that should be interesting because, of course, we were talking about Envy and Rogue just a little bit ago.
Yeah, that means they're playing crossover. That land doesn't mean anything. So let me just put just a precursor on all these tournaments. I think we're actually hitting peak online tournaments now.
Pretty close,
Not peak, but it's getting already like every team is playing every other team in all these online leagues, and none of them matter, and half of them are going to have to go away soon, and then everyone's going to need more prize money to keep the teams. And hopefully this is how it evolves, just like Counter-Strike and Dota have, where each event needs to increase their prize money to keep the teams, because the same teams are playing against each other. So there's only so much I will take in now all of these tournaments. They are the best way to see what teams stack up going into Gamescom. But because they're all online, you still have EU teams playing NA teams and NA servers and EU servers. Maybe that was cool for the beginning of the game because it was just to showcase NA versus EU. Now it means very little to me in terms of who's the better team.
I mean, I think the teams are also better now, and the ping has a higher impact on the eventual results as well. When teams are closer. Plus, I think that they made some changes where it's more impactful. So it's it's like kind of whatever. We've already seen all these teams play so many times too. I mean,
there was actually something. Fishsticks is in chat, and he actually brought this up where he said, he worried that are we hitting a point of saturation here where there's so many events, there's so many different orgs that want to get into Overwatch right now, that are we hitting a point where there's just complete and total event saturation? You just have events going on constantly, where at some point you get tired of watching C9 versus Envy mark 782. It's sort of the same issue that, say, the baseball regular season has, where maybe you don't care about Red Sox Yankees iteration number 8. So do you guys think that there's too many tournaments going on right now overall?
I think there's too many online tournaments that have such low prize money that it just doesn't matter. I mean, Counter-Strike is at the point where the ESL Pro League, which is all played online, is like $600,000. So all those games really matter, even though they're online, because it's all worth a lot of money. Even though the money is not the driving force of like the teams trying or playing or the competition being good, because esports has grown so much, and we know how big Overwatch esports is going to get. It's hard for me to get hype over like a $2,000 whatever, and the weeklies are it's just cool to see the teams what meta they're going to play. But I think that, we are having... It's not saturation as much as all of the leagues need to have much higher prize money, and then the teams will probably take it a lot more seriously, each of them individually, and then we'll probably only have a few of those leagues spread out with the tournaments. But there's still more room to have a lot more events, especially LAN events. There's not really any LAN events. Overwatch could use a lot more events.
I think after Gamescom, we're going to see like a pretty hefty lane schedule start popping up. I hope. I mean, you'd expect that. And I think also that will kind of be the point where the competition level increases. I know that some teams have some boot camps planned, heading into that event like next month. More teams are probably going to be looking at getting team houses and things like that now that it's actually going to matter more, because there are these competitions with significant money on the line, which there really haven't been so far. So I think we're on the way there. I mean, it is true, though. A lot of these online tournaments is just like, do you really care who's winning this 5,000 tournament? Like, there's another one tomorrow,
You're all kind of running together with the same teams, too. Exactly. With only one or two different teams changing. That also shows that there's not a whole lot of new teams entering the space, other than players leaving their teams or being kicked off of them, starting new teams.
The interesting thing is that we do have an idea of who the top teams are, and I've been involved in some of the tournament organizing, not even by choice. I just sort of get thrown in and end up wearing this hat from time to time. But the interesting thing is that you do have your open tournaments, of course, like the Ghost of Gamer weeklies are always open for all signups and all the rest. But when you're talking about the bigger events and whatnot, people don't really want to run an open league, in part because they already know the teams are going to go up here. So you do get a lot of these invite tournaments where you sort of get the same 8 teams over and over again. And it's really up to teams, I think, to prove themselves in more of the open tournaments, because if you have teams go forward and say, okay, we won the weekly over X team that's usually invited, maybe now I can get invited to these events that are going on.
And that's one reason why I like this ESL format, because we got 4 weeks. There's basically 4 different qualifiers. The 4th one's not going to have any of the big name teams in it. So some of these teams are actually going to be able to showcase themselves like on a bigger stage where people will actually get to watch them play. And maybe we'll see some new stars being born or something. Who knows? Like I think that's a good opportunity for teams to finally get some exposure where maybe they are a pretty good team, but if you're always losing in the quarterfinals or something to Cloud9 and Gosu tournaments or whatever, you don't get a chance to really show it, right? So I think that'll be good.
So
I think the ESL qualifiers are actually done very well. Like, those mean more to me, even the 3rd and 4th qualifiers, which will have lower end teams, than maybe this next iBuyPower Cup and or like Beyond the Summit and or the next Beat It, whatever. It's all going to be generally the same teams, and they're all played online, and it's all online games again, and my heart is already leaving the care level mode for online, for so many online games. So unless the prize money gets to hundreds of thousands, which would be cool, or at least in the 5 figures for like a season, I think the teams and players should actually maybe take a little bit of a step back and try to see what they want to do, maybe force the event organizers to have bigger prize money, just like they did in the Counter-Strike and Dota scene. They're very good at making sure they get what they want. I think that might be coming soon for Overwatch.
It's definitely possible.
Alrighty,
I think sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just saying it's definitely possible, but I hope that they don't have to, because we're going to start seeing some more of those huge events announced soon.
Alrighty, I was going to say, I think that leads us to the end here tonight. We pretty much hit everything. Usually we'll like do a little bit longer, but pretty tight schedule here today. Thank you, of course, Slasher and oPlaiD for coming here and hosting this with me. It's been good. We got to cover most of the topics here in the competitive scene. Usually we'll go a little bit deeper, a little bit longer, and also bring in a guest or two. But any final thoughts, you guys, before we sign off here for the day?
One topic we didn't get to discuss was Reunited signing a 17-year-old kid off of the competitive play ladder. So it's like kind of one of the first examples of a talent getting scouted from competitive play, which I think is going to become a lot more common.
And he's English, right?
He is a British youngster.
Unbelievable! More than getting him off the ladder, he is British.
Yeah, he's only played the game since release. He was playing Genji in the qualifier the other day. He was doing well. He just played in the whatever's going on, Acer thing.
Playing right now.
Yeah,
winning 2-1.
So he looks like he's pretty talented. He obviously is incredibly inexperienced, but he's got Reunited behind him, and they're FPS veterans for almost 10 years. So I think that's like a good relationship that more teams will look at. I think in the future, if they need players, there definitely going to be some talents on the ladder where they probably might deserve or be able to be competing at the top level, but maybe they can't make a team themselves. So I think that I think that's good for the scene that Reunited's doing stuff like this, and I think it might start more of a trend.
Alrighty, well, that is going to wrap it us for here today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.
Rod gets his final thoughts too, ZP.
Okay, go ahead, Rod. Yeah, Rod gets his final. Go.
Do you know what we're This ain't no broadcast, ZP. You got to go cast or something? Is that what you're going to do?
I do. That is why I'm trying to wrap it up. Normally, I'd be like, okay, let's talk forever, but
which ones are they? Speed It playoffs, right?
Okay, yeah, it's Envy versus. I'm actually in lobby with all the teams right now. I am ready to just swap right over. So that's why I'm just saying, like, all right, let's go. But yes,
good for a show. Good talking to you. Good having you, oPlaiD. I want to see you step it up more. You got to take more charge. And ZP, you're 2 nights already. 2 nights.
I know. I need to let a little bit more edge on the. You called me out on it, Rod. You're completely right. There's a point where I just need look, this sucks. This doesn't suck.
I had much fun doing the no hero limit. It just wasn't exciting.
Okay, you're right. The no hero. It wasn't that great to get. All right. Fair. Absolutely fair. I will try and bring out a little bit more edge next time instead of I don't know. I'm just careful. I'm political at some points, but you're right. I need to loosen up a little bit, especially on the talk show point of things. But you're right. So that I guess that was our final thought. But thank you guys for all tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.